Arden Mercer stood on my porch like the divorce had been a typo that needed correcting. Pearl gray coat, chin up, that tight little smile she wore when she wanted something and planned to call it reasonable. My name is Nolan Crowell. I was 58 years old, and I lived on Alder Lane in Briar Hollow, Vermont. The decree hit the docket 19 days earlier, and somehow my ex-mother-in-law showed up at 7:10 in the morning like she owned the sunrise. I had on sweatpants and one sock. Coffee steamed in my hand. I didn't invite her in right away because the last time I treated Arden like family, she treated my house like a future listing. She didn't ask how I was doing. She looked past my shoulder at the entryway trim in the front hall like she was running numbers in her head. Then she said, polite as sugar, "So why are you still here?" Quick note. Before listening, share in the comments which city or country you're watching from. And let's continue. I kept my face still. When the decree landed, Blythe had been 52. Arden was 76. Rowan Okafor, my attorney and best friend, was 59. Sutton Hale was 63. My dad Gideon was 84. Calder Finch was 56. Mavis Dorn was 53. Quinn Hensley was 57. Arden loved facts when they served her, and she ignored them when they didn't. "This is my address," I said, and I didn't move aside. Arden blinked like I'd missed the script. "Nolan, I'm just thinking of Blythe. She needs space. You should do the right thing." The right thing to Arden always meant the thing that benefited a Mercer. I took a slow sip of coffee, let it burn my tongue, and held her stare. "Arden, this place is mine. It always has been." Her smile twitched once. Quick, mean. She hadn't come to talk. She'd come to see if I'd fold from habit. She tried to keep it light. "It's a lot of house for one man." I let that sit between us. Cold air and old entitlement. "If you have questions about property, you can speak through counsel." Her cheeks tightened like she was doing math she hadn't planned on doing this early. "Counsel? Nolan, don't be dramatic." "I'm not," I said. "I'm being accurate." The porch boards creaked under my bare heel as I stepped fully outside and pulled the door mostly closed behind me. It was obvious this wasn't grief standing on my porch. It was one more attempt to push me out of my own house. I let her stand there for one long beat. Then I said, "You're going to want to choose your next words carefully." Her eyes stayed on me, measuring. What she was really doing, right there on my porch, had nothing to do with my feelings, and everything to do with my address. I bought the place on Alder Lane in Briar Hollow, Vermont, 2 years before I ever met Blythe. Briar Hollow was a college town kind of place where everybody knew your car and nobody minded their business, which meant the gossip traveled fast and the smiles were never just smiles. I worked as an architect, restoring old public spaces, libraries, parks, storefronts the town swore it couldn't afford to lose. I wasn't flashy, but I was steady, and I liked things that lasted because I didn't. My granddad, Leland Crowell, was a leather and cloth guy, the type who could look at a ripped jacket and fix it without acting like you owed him your soul. He made saddles, repaired boots, stitched anything you handed him, and he smelled like oil and worn canvas even after he washed up. When he died, he left me $74,200 and a note in his blunt handwriting that said, "Put it into something that won't blow away." I read that line twice, then I folded it and kept it in my wallet for months like it was a warning. I did exactly what he told me. I kept my expenses simple, drove the same pickup until the seat foam started showing, and I didn't try to impress anybody with toys. I found a 1920s house with a wide porch and a yard that needed real work, not decorative work, and I bought it because it felt solid under my feet. The day I got the keys, the realtor said, "You're gonna love the charm," and I said, "I'm gonna love the deed." Then I walked the rooms and planned repairs like it was a job site. I met Blythe Mercer at a fundraising dinner Mavis Dorn hosted. One of those events where strangers pretended they were friends for 2 hours because the food was decent and the tickets were expensive. Mavis floated through the room like she owned the air, tapping shoulders and saying things like, "You two need to meet, you'll click." And somehow she was always right. Blythe worked communications for a regional arts and development group, and she had that easy charm that didn't feel like a hustle. She listened like she meant it. She laughed fast, and when I told her I restored old spaces, she said, "That sounds like you save things for a living," like she'd actually thought about it. When I mentioned I owned a place on Alder Lane, her whole posture relaxed, not greedy, more relieved. She said, "I'm not proud of it, but I had a messy credit stretch." And she didn't look away when she admitted it. I told her, "I don't care about your past as long as you're straight with me now." And she nodded like that was the kind of sentence she'd been waiting to hear. Arden came into the picture like a fog bank, slow and cold and everywhere at once. Former realtor, now running a staging business, always polished, always helpful, always noticing what something was worth. The first time she toured my place, she didn't say nice home or congratulations or anything normal. She asked, "How long have you owned this? What did you pay? What are the taxes? And is the deed just in your name?" I answered her with flat facts because I didn't yet understand she was collecting them. And I told myself she was protective because Blythe was worth dealing with a difficult mother. We got married on September 21st, 2018, a small backyard thing with cider and string lights, right there behind my house. Blythe squeezed my hand. The officiant asked the question, and I said my vows out loud with Arden watching from the first row. After the lights came down and the last chair got folded, Blythe and I slipped back into the house. The yard still smelled like cider and damp grass, and Arden's perfume lingered near the back door, sharp and expensive. I told myself the hard part was over, and I went to work on being a husband. The first year of marriage was good. We had routines that fit us. Saturday coffee downtown, Sunday home projects with sawdust on our jeans and music too loud. Blythe would hand me a measuring tape and say, "Tell me where you want the shelves," and I'd point and get it done. It was quiet, steady, and for a while it felt like the house had finally stopped bracing for somebody else's opinion. Arden started with just-in-case moves. One afternoon she stood in my kitchen and said, "Emergencies happen, and a spare key is just smart." She listed fires, frozen pipes, and the idea of us being out of town like she was doing us a favor by imagining disaster. I said, "No, Arden, we're fine," and I kept my voice flat. Blythe slid in beside her mom and smiled too hard. "It's easier if we just let her feel included," she told me, like my boundaries were bad manners. I held out for a bit, then I caved when Blythe promised it would be for actual emergencies and nothing else. Arden took the key without saying thank you, and she tucked it into her purse like it belonged there. I should have known she collected leverage, but I still tried to be easy about it. Arden's language shifted in little bites after that. I'd hear her chatting with a neighbor and say, "Blythe's house," then laugh and correct herself like it was cute. When she visited, she brought stiff, formal flowers, then walked the room slow, eyes flicking to corners and windows like she was checking work. "You've maintained this well," she'd say, and it never sounded like a compliment. She also got bold about money talk. I'd be at the sink washing dishes and she'd say to Blythe, just loud enough for me to hear, "It's important to build family equity, sweetheart, and you want security." Blythe would nod and make the smallest sound of agreement, like she was calming a dog. If I turned and said, "We're not doing this," Blythe would go quiet and tired looking, like I'd asked her to choose between oxygen and water. She'd whisper, "Can we not do this tonight?" And then she'd leave the room before I could finish the sentence. By year 6, I found out Arden had used that key, and I didn't find out because she confessed. I came home on a weekday evening, set my bag down, and heard Arden's voice echoing from my front hall like she'd paid rent. "Blythe, I'm here," she called, already inside. I didn't explode. I waited until Arden drifted toward the living room. Then I looked at Blythe and said, "Why does your mother have access to my home without my say-so?" Blythe gave me that soft, helpless look and answered, "She worries, and it's just easier." A month later, I changed the lock myself, hands steady and jaw tight, and I didn't announce it like a threat. Arden showed up once after that and had to ring the bell like everyone else, standing on my porch with that razor-thin smile while I watched her through the peephole. I opened the door just enough to make the point, then I slid the new deadbolt home with a clean, loud click. Around year 7, the pressure came back wearing a suit and tie. Arden stopped pretending it was about safety and started talking like she was giving me professional advice. "Have you refinanced lately?" she'd ask, like we were old coworkers. "Rates are good right now," she'd add. And she always said it with that little nod like the decision was already made and I just hadn't caught up. Blythe started repeating Arden's phrases like they were her own thoughts, and that was the part that got under my skin. She'd lean against the counter, voice soft like she was being gentle with me, and say, "It's just paperwork, and it's just peace of mind." When I didn't react, she'd push again with, "Couples do this, Nolan. It's normal." I'd look at her and see her mom's logic wearing my wife's face, and I didn't like the feeling of being handled in my own kitchen. The false ally moment hit on a snowy February night when the windows rattled, and the porch light threw a weak yellow circle on the drifted steps. Blythe came in from the driveway shaking snow off her boots, and she acted like she was on my side. "Mom is overstepping," she said, and she even rolled her eyes like we were a team. Then she pulled a printed form from her tote bag and slid it across the table anyway, careful and neat, like she was setting down a dinner plate. "Just sign it so she calms down," she told me, still using that soft voice. "It doesn't change anything, and it will stop the constant comments." I didn't touch the paper. I didn't even read it yet because I recognized the setup. That line right there was how people lost houses, and Blythe had said it like it was a bedtime story. I pushed the form back toward her with 2 fingers. "I'm not signing anything without Rowan Okafor looking at it," I said, and I kept my tone boring on purpose. Blythe's face tightened for half a second. It wasn't anger, not exactly. It was panic, like involving an attorney would make it real, and Blythe wanted everything to stay in the pretend zone, where nobody had to admit what they were doing. "Do you have to make it so serious?" she asked, and her eyes darted to the printer like it had betrayed her. "I'm not the one making it serious," I said. "I'm the one stopping it from getting stupid." Around that same time, Arden started working the town like a rumor mill. I didn't hear it firsthand at first. I heard it through Calder Finch, my neighbor, a carpenter who always knew what truck was parked where and why. He caught me by my mailbox one afternoon and kept his voice low like he was warning me about a loose dog. "People are saying you're having a hard time," he said, then hesitated like he hated repeating it. "That you're unstable." That word didn't mean anything until it cost you something, and I had plenty to lose. I was leading a restoration proposal for the old Briar Hollow Library Plaza, a public-facing job with small-town politics and bored people hungry for a story. Arden knew exactly where to aim, too. She'd staged half the houses of the board members, and she didn't have to shout to steer a room. She just had to nudge and let people fill in the worst parts themselves. So I didn't respond with drama. I responded with polite accuracy, because a whisper campaign hated paperwork. I pulled up emails, meeting notes, calendars, receipts, and permit timelines, and I organized them into a clean folder with dates and names that didn't wobble. Then I printed a copy, slid it into my bag, and walked out the door to the next board meeting. I carried that folder into the meeting like a shield and a warning, and I kept doing it until people stopped looking at me like I might fall apart in public. The rumors didn't die, but they learned to stay quiet when I was in the room. I didn't confront Arden about any of it, because calling out a whisper campaign just feeds it, and she loved attention even when it came dressed as concern. The turning point wasn't a screaming fight. It was a Sunday in late October, the kind of day that looked peaceful from the outside and rotten once you stepped inside it. I came home early with takeout balanced on my forearm, already thinking about eating on the couch and shutting my brain off for an hour. Then I saw Arden's car parked out front like it had a right to be there, and my stomach went tight because I hadn't been told she was coming. I didn't slam the door or stomp my way in. I walked in normal, set my keys in the bowl, and listened, because surprises like that weren't accidents in my house anymore. I heard voices upstairs in my office, the room where I kept project plans and client notes, and it hit me wrong that they were up there at all. Arden's voice was low and sharp, like she was giving instructions, and Blythe's voice was smaller, like she was trying to keep someone calm without agreeing outright. Arden didn't waste time with politeness. "The smart move is to formalize the home as family property before anything changes," she said, like she was talking about a filing deadline. I heard papers shifting, a chair leg scraping, and then Arden kept going. "Refinancing, deed language, timing, all of that matters, and you need to stop being passive about it." Blythe didn't sound shocked. She sounded worn down, like this had been happening in pieces for years and she'd stopped resisting because resisting cost her too much. "He's going to push back if you come at him hard," she said, and I could picture her rubbing her forehead the way she did when she wanted a problem to disappear. Arden answered without hesitation, and her line drilled straight into my head. "He's good at building things. He's not good at protecting them." I stood there with the takeout getting cold and my jaw locked so tight it ached. I didn't storm upstairs and I didn't announce myself because the second I did, it would turn into a performance where I was the villain and Arden was the worried mother. I walked back downstairs, set the food on the counter, and waited like I hadn't heard a thing. When they finally came down, they acted normal in that fake, practiced way, and Blythe asked, "Did you get enough for all of us?" Like we were having a casual family dinner. That night, after Arden left, I sat at my kitchen table and started my own plan. It wasn't revenge, and it wasn't a speech. I grabbed a manila folder, wrote "house" on the tab in black marker, and made a list, because I needed a record that would hold up. The next morning I called Rowan Okafor, and I didn't dress it up. "I overheard them in my office," I told him, and my voice stayed even though my hands didn't. I laid out the key situation, the paperwork pressure, the way Arden talked around me like I wasn't in the room, and the rumor haze that had floated through town like smoke. Rowan didn't tell me to communicate better or try a date night. He said, "You need to assume they're already moving on paper." And then he told me what to gather: deed, closing documents, inheritance trail, insurance, and taxes. I made copies and stored them off-site at my dad's place the same day. Gideon Crowell didn't talk much, but when I told him why, he nodded once like he'd been waiting for me to get serious. Then he cleared a space in his filing cabinet without asking another question. After that, I started paying attention to money in a way I hadn't before. And that night I sat back down at my table, opened our account history, and started marking every withdrawal that didn't make sense. I circled the transactions that didn't match our normal life and kept my mouth shut. I wasn't looking for a fight. I was looking for a pattern. The proof wasn't hidden in a safe. It was sitting in plain sight like they assumed I'd never look, because I was the guy who kept the peace and let other people steer. One Saturday morning in early December, Blythe left her laptop open in my office, screen glowing on the desk like a dare. A document title sat in the recent files list with my street name in it, and that wasn't subtle. I clicked it, and my stomach went cold before the first page even finished loading. I read every page slow, the way you read a contract when you know somebody's trying to slip a blade into the fine print. It was a draft agreement reclassifying Leland's inheritance as a Mercer family bridge loan, dated 2 years earlier, claiming it entitled Blythe to half the home equity if the marriage dissolved. There was a signature block for me, blank like they were waiting for the right moment to shove it under my nose. There was a notary line, and there was so much official-sounding language it felt sweaty, like somebody trying too hard to sound legitimate. I didn't print it, and I didn't forward it, and I didn't click save. Rowan had already drilled that into me, and I listened because Rowan didn't get sentimental about threats. I took photos of every page with my phone, making sure the title and the paragraphs were readable. Then I backed out and left the file exactly where it was. Evidence didn't need my fingerprints all over it, and gossip didn't need my time. I called Rowan the minute he was awake, and I kept my voice tight. "There's a draft on her laptop with Alder Lane in the title," I said. "It calls my granddad's money a Mercer bridge loan, and it's backdated." Rowan didn't gasp or tell me to calm down. He said, "Do not touch it again." And then he walked me through preserving it properly, like we were documenting a cracked beam on a job site. He had me capture screenshots that showed the recent files list, the file properties, and the creation information. He had me document the metadata and preserve a hash value through his office, because the file could lie with a typed date but the system trail wouldn't. When he looked at what I sent, he pointed out the same thing I'd already clocked. The draft was pretending to be 2 years old, but the metadata told the truth about when it was really created. Arden missed one detail. The draft referenced the wrong trust bank and used a phrase about Leland's estate that only someone guessing would use. I knew the real wording because I'd held the original note and the trust paperwork in my own hands, and I could still see Leland's blunt handwriting when I closed my eyes. Arden couldn't have known enough to fake it unless she'd seen documents she never had legal access to, and that narrowed the list of possibilities in a way I didn't enjoy. Rowan told me, "Bring in Sutton Hale," and I didn't argue. Sutton was a forensic accountant who spoke in numbers the way some people spoke in feelings: flat, clear, and hard to dodge. He went through our records and found small transfers over time into an account I didn't recognize, totaling $18,650 across 15 months. It wasn't one dramatic hit that would have set off alarms. It was steady siphoning, like someone turning a valve and trusting I'd never checked the meter. While Sutton was finishing his report, I stopped assuming the house was secure. I replaced the locks again and installed a doorbell camera, because I was done pretending my front door was just a door. A week later, the camera caught Arden on my porch trying a key anyway, her hand confident until the lock didn't give. She paused, glanced around like the street might judge her, and then she walked off like nothing happened. Calder Finch told me about the missing piece when I ran into him by the fence line. He said, "I saw a locksmith van near your porch earlier this month," and his eyes stayed on my face to see if I already knew. When I asked who was there, he didn't hesitate. "Blythe scheduled it while you were out, and Arden was standing there supervising like it was her project." I went back inside, pulled up the doorbell footage, and saved the clip to a drive with the date stamped in the file name. I filed it like I filed permits because that's what my life had turned into. The hardest part wasn't the evidence or the spreadsheets or the little legal steps. The hardest part was acting normal while I watched my own marriage turn into a case file, right there under my roof. I didn't go cold to punish Blythe. I went quiet to protect myself. And there's a difference even if it looked the same from across the kitchen. I kept conversations short, kept routines steady, and stopped sharing anything that could be used against me later. If she asked about my day, I gave her the safe version and changed the subject, because Arden had trained her to repeat details like they were harmless. Blythe tried again to play mediator, like she could keep both sides happy if she just stayed soft enough. She'd say, "Mom is just anxious, and she doesn't know how to stop." Then she'd slide right into, "Please sign something small so we can close the loop." Every time, I gave her the same line with the same tone. "Rowan reviews everything," I said, and I didn't decorate it with apologies. Blythe would press her lips together like she'd bitten down on disappointment. Then she'd look away like I'd ruined the mood on purpose. Arden kept pressing from the outside, and she got slick about it. A board member I trusted pulled me aside after a work session and kept his voice low, like he didn't want the air to carry it. "Arden called a couple people tied to the library plaza," he said, and he glanced around the hallway like Arden might be hiding behind a coat rack. "She framed you as overwhelmed, like she was being caring, and I figured you should know." I didn't confront her in public because public fights were Arden's favorite stage. I showed up prepared, and I kept my face calm even when my stomach wanted to twist. At a community meeting, somebody asked if the timeline was slipping, and I answered with specifics: permit dates, contractor bids, material lead times, so the room heard competence instead of rumor. When another person pushed on budget, I pointed to the line items and the contingency plan like I was reading from a blueprint, and I watched the crowd settle because facts have weight in a small town. Mavis Dorn caught me later near the coat rack at one of her events, and she didn't waste time with small talk. "Arden tried to corner me," she said, eyes sharp, voice clipped. "She wanted to know if you were cracking, if you were dating, if work was too much, anything she could twist into a story." I told Mavis, "I appreciate you not feeding her," and Mavis answered, "I don't like being used as a tool." Then she walked off like she was done with the whole mess. Sutton finished his report, and Rowan built a clean narrative from it that made my skin crawl in the simplest way. Separate account, concealed transfers, fraudulent draft, backdating, metadata proof, and the inheritance trail laid out like a straight road. Rowan didn't hype it up when he called. He said, "This is solid, and it reads clean," like he was talking about a well-built case instead of my marriage falling apart. I moved my paycheck into a solo account, froze my credit, and documented household contributions like I was preparing for an audit. I took photos of receipts, pulled statements, and logged who paid what without turning it into a speech. When Blythe asked why I was suddenly so organized, I kept my eyes on the page and said, "Because I'm done being careless with my own life." Gideon came by one evening and helped me label a banker's box of originals at my kitchen table. He didn't ask for details, and I didn't offer them, because we weren't that kind of family. He just slid a folder into the box, pressed the lid down, and said, "Paper holds up better than talk." I taped the box shut and carried it to the trunk of my car while he watched the street like a quiet guard. Blythe noticed the shift anyway, because you can't hide preparation in a marriage without changing the air. She stood in the doorway of the office and asked, "Are you planning something?" And her voice tried to sound casual, but her hands didn't know what to do. I looked up long enough to make it stick. "I'm protecting what I built," I said, and I didn't leave room for negotiation. Rowan filed first, clean and controlled, no theatrics, because in small towns, whoever looks calmer is assumed to be telling the truth. When his message came through with the stamped copy attached, I didn't sit there debating what it meant for my future. I forwarded it to my personal drive, locked my phone, and walked straight outside to start the truck. The truck caught on the second turn, and the heater started coughing warm air like it had an opinion. I backed out of my driveway with that stamped filing sitting in my head like a weight, and I drove straight to Rowan's office because I didn't trust my own house to stay quiet. Rowan met me at the door with the same calm face he used in court, and he said, "You did the right thing by filing first, so now we stay boring and precise." I nodded once, because boring was exactly what Arden hated. Blythe didn't fight the divorce the way people imagined fights. She avoided and delayed, and she tried to live in the gaps between decisions. She'd agree in one room and backslide in the next, like she was trying to keep two worlds from colliding without picking a side. One night she stood by the sink and said, "We can be civil and not drag this out." And the next morning she'd send a message about needing time, like time was a legal strategy. I kept my answers short and clean, and I let Rowan be the one who talked in paragraphs. Arden tried to step into the driver's seat immediately, and she did it the way she always did, with polished pressure. Emails showed up with helpful documents attached, suggestions about mediators, and little reminders that marital property was complicated, like complexity would scare me into handing over my front door. Rowan didn't bite. He kept it narrow every single time. The house was pre-marriage, purchased with traced funds, maintained under my name, and never refinanced into joint ownership. "Clean chain," he said, tapping the deed copy like it was a finish nail. "If they want to argue around it, they can try, but they'll need proof and they don't have it." Blythe's side floated the idea of marital contribution because we'd lived there together, and they said it in that careful tone like it was just a fair thought. Rowan didn't scoff or get cute. He asked for proof, then countered with Sutton's report and the account trail like he was laying out measurements on a workbench. The fraudulent draft became the pivot point, not because we waved it around for drama, but because it showed intent. Somebody had been preparing to rewrite history on paper, and courts didn't like that when the metadata didn't match the story. Arden hired Quinn Hensley, a civil attorney with a practical reputation, and the shift was obvious the second Quinn got involved. Quinn wasn't there to be emotional, and he wasn't there to perform for Arden. He was there to assess risk and stop stupid moves, which meant he didn't let her run her mouth unchecked in a room full of professionals. In mediation, Quinn looked at Rowan once and asked, careful and level, "Is there any signed agreement supporting the loan theory?" Rowan answered, "No," and slid the metadata summary across the table like a receipt you couldn't argue with. Blythe looked sick when she saw it laid out, not because she suddenly turned noble, but because she realized Arden's plan had put her in a position where she'd have to lie out loud. The settlement handled the money quietly, and it hit like a door closing. The siphoned transfers counted, the separate account got addressed, and Blythe didn't get rewarded for a hidden exit fund. The house stayed with me, period, with no partial interest, no revisit language, and nothing soft Arden could pry open later. Blythe moved out in 10 days, took what was hers, and I didn't block the door or clap as she carried boxes past me. The decree was entered on a Wednesday in late February, and I drove home alone with a folder on the passenger seat, turned onto Alder Lane, and carried that folder straight to my kitchen table. I sat at my kitchen table with the decree folder under my hands and tried to let the quiet feel normal. The house didn't feel sad so much as vacant, like it was waiting to see who would try to take a swing next. I didn't have any interest in celebrating, because winning something you already owned still felt like getting dragged to the ground and told to prove you belonged there. Arden didn't accept the outcome in her heart, even when the court accepted it on paper, and I only learned how fast she pivoted because Rowan stayed plugged in. In the 19 days after that Wednesday, Rowan called me and said, "I'm hearing she asked around about ways to cloud the title." He didn't claim it was proven, and he didn't need to, because asked around was Arden's favorite first step. Rowan added, "I'm moving fast on this, and you stay boring." Then he told me which filings and notices he was locking down so nobody could get cute with my property records. Blythe came back for boxes during that stretch, moving like a person trying not to touch anything that might spark. She wasn't hostile, but she wasn't honest either, not fully, and she kept her eyes off the walls like they might accuse her. At one point she let something slip without meaning to, and it landed hard. "Mom is furious at Quinn," she said, dragging a tote across the floor, "because he didn't fight hard enough." Like attorneys were supposed to be hired muscle instead of professionals who knew when a case was toxic. She also admitted, in her own words, that Arden had been pushing the plan for years and framing it as protecting the family. I looked at Blythe and said, "You know that really meant protecting Arden's idea of ownership, right?" Blythe didn't argue with me, and that silence told me she'd known for a long time and just hated saying it out loud. Rowan later told me Quinn finally put a stop sign in Arden's face. He said Quinn warned her, in plain terms, that if she touched that forged theory again, she wasn't in a family dispute anymore. She was flirting with fraud exposure. I pictured Arden hearing the word fraud and pretending she didn't understand it, like language couldn't pin her down. I also pictured Quinn not caring about her act, and that part helped me sleep. Calder filled in the small-town consequences because in Briar Hollow people punished reputation without ever saying they were punishing it. He leaned on my fence line and said, "2 local agents are giving Arden cold shoulders." Then he shrugged like it wasn't his business, but he was still going to say it. Word got around she tried to strong-arm a divorce property situation, and folks don't like getting close to that kind of mess. I didn't cheer at the idea of her losing work, but I didn't feel sorry either, because she'd aimed at my livelihood first. I tightened my own life up the same way I tightened a job site when somebody kept walking past caution tape. New locks, cameras, a mailbox that actually locked, and a clean paper trail for anything tied to the property. It wasn't paranoia, it was maintenance, and I treated it like routine. Calder and I rebuilt the back fence over 2 Saturdays, not because Arden ever pointed it out, but because I liked finishing things the right way. We set posts, leveled boards, and kept the conversation practical, because that was how I stayed steady. Gideon came by with a thermos and sat on the porch while we worked, and he didn't do pep talks. He just showed up, watched the street, and handed me a fresh cup when mine went cold. Mavis told me Arden tried to recruit her into checking on me, like I was a hazard that needed monitoring. Mavis said, "I shut it down because I'm not doing her dirty work." And I told her, "I won't forget that." Then I went back to tightening screws on the gate hinge. Blythe's last sting wasn't even intentional. As she carried the final box to her car, she said, almost casual, "Mom really thought you'd cave once you were alone." That told me exactly what Arden had counted on all along, and it burned clean through any leftover confusion I had. On the 19th morning after the decree, my doorbell rang at 7:10. I didn't hope for kindness or closure. I picked up my coffee, checked the camera feed, and walked straight for the front door. I opened the door with my coffee still in hand and found Arden Mercer staring back at me. I told her this conversation would stay factual, and she stared like she was deciding whether I meant it. Then she tried to step inside like the house was a shared hallway. I held the doorframe, kept us on the threshold for a beat, then stepped aside. I let her in because I wanted the line drawn clean. She went straight to my kitchen, pulled out a chair, and sat without asking. Her hands folded, her face set into concern, and she said she was worried about me keeping up a property alone. She made it sound like a wellness check, but her eyes kept scanning cabinets and trim like she was doing inventory. I didn't offer coffee, and I didn't play host at all. I sat across from her and waited until she stopped filling the room with words. Arden finally asked what she came for. "Why haven't you moved out yet, Nolan?" she said, like the decree erased my name from the deed. I kept my voice flat because emotion was her doorway. "I bought this place before I married Blythe, with my granddad Leland's inheritance and my savings, and every document still says the same thing." She pressed her lips together and tried to smile anyway. She started with, "Family law is complicated," and I cut her off before she could ramble. "Rowan Okafor is my attorney," I said, and I watched her eyes sharpen because she knew his reputation. Then I laid out the facts like a job site checklist. The backdated bridge loan draft, the blank signature block, the file trail exposing when it was really created, and the trust language mistake that proved the writer did not know Leland's paperwork. Arden went still, not calm, just recalculating. "I have never seen that document," she said, like softness could rewrite a file. I didn't call her a liar because Arden loved turning tone into the argument. "That's not the story the file tells," I said. I added Sutton Hale's findings about the concealed transfers and told her I had printed reports, copies stored off-site, and counsel ready if anything popped up. Then I gave her the only warning she needed, and I gave it without heat. Any new attempt to claim an interest in my house wouldn't be a family disagreement anymore. It would be fraud, and my attorney would treat it that way. Arden stood up, gathered her coat, and headed for my front door like the room had turned hostile on its own. At the mat, she paused like she expected me to soften, but I didn't move or speak. Later, Rowan told me she tried one more angle with Quinn and got shut down. I turned the deadbolt, walked back to the kitchen, and locked my folder in the drawer with the doorbell clips beside it. Leave a comment and tell me this. When someone in your family tries to rewrite what you built and push you out, do you draw the line immediately, or do you wait until you have proof in hand?